Welcome everybody who is listening and watching us either on UN TV or on Zoom. We have a motto, we have a mission, not just for the next 90 minutes. What gets measured gets done, measuring the efficacy of human trafficking policies and programs. And we have a highly knowledgeable panel, and they will discuss the state of affairs now and what needs to be done presently within the UN system to preempt, in other words, to bankrupt the business of human trafficking. We will talk about that later. And first, we are very happy that we are being joined for her opening remarks to our session by Ambassador Cedano. Mrs. Cedano is currently serving as Deputy Permanent Representative of the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic to the United Nations. Welcome. She has an extensive experience as a diplomat, including as lead negotiator on issues including sustainable development, international cooperation, humanitarian affairs, and trade issues. Please, Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to everyone. I'd like to welcome you to today's panel discussion, which has been organized jointly by the NGO Committee to Stop Trafficking in Persons, along with UNOCD, ODC, ILO, IMO, IOM, and the Permanent Mission of the Dominican Republic. Colleagues, trafficking in persons is a horrendous and shocking crime, and also one of the most lucrative and highly proliferating one especially now in the midst of the pandemic. Global concern about it has nurtured great legal and normative change, including an international law framework like the Palermo Protocol and key guidelines such as the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. Many member states have adopted action plans, strategies, and enacted and enhanced laws to put an end to trafficking in persons and bring about a gender perspective, prosecution, protection, and prevention into our efforts, and of course, accountability. However, we continue to see how this lucrative industry continues feeding itself from the most vulnerable and making large profits. As the recommendation paper prepared by the NGO Committee to Stop Trafficking in Persons, entitled Bankrupting the Business of Human Trafficking, these approaches are missing the underlying concept of economics, that if we are able to recruit 40.3 million victims today, tomorrow, there will be a new set of victims, as it is a too lucrative industry with at least $150 billion annually in illicit profit, according to the ILO. Traffickers therefore adapt, finding new ways to craft and set traps designed to recruit potential victims, which has been demonstrated through the pandemic, where the cases have been on the rise. It is imperative then to ask ourselves, are these policies and programs enough to stop the crime from occurring? How can the international community expand its policies and programs to bankrupt this business? And this is why we are here today. Over the last decades, attention to end to human trafficking has prompted substantial investment in counter-trafficking interventions by intergovernmental organizations, states, and civil society. That investment and the human rights imperative that underpin counter-trafficking work demand that these interventions demonstrate accountability, results, and a beneficial impact. Indeed, more rigor in evaluating and measuring the success or failure of such policies and programs are needed and, of course, long overdue. Last November, UN member states reinvigorated our commitments to this fight through the adoption of the political declaration on the implementation of UN Global Plan of Action to combat trafficking in persons, which the Dominican Republic, along with the Philippines, had the honor to facilitate. In the declaration, member states, multilateral organizations, and the private sector are encouraged to adopt ethical and transparent practices in their procurement and supply chains, and strongly urge to regularly disclose and provide further access to relevant information on these practices, including deterring and penalizing fraudulent and abusive recruitment practices. Many of the challenges of evaluating these interventions are not especially unique, and there is considerable space for member states and other stakeholders to learn from the experience and insight of other fields of work, which this panel discussion brings. And as none of us can put an end to human trafficking alone, we have to do it together. This dialogue is not the end, but rather the first step in it's a very serious issue, and we need to take it seriously. We have to avoid the normalization of human trafficking. We would like to continue looking forward to accomplishing the end of trafficking in persons by 2030, precisely as it represents a crucial part in being able to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and looking forward for a fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Cedano, for these introductory words and already getting right into the issue. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me take you along a couple of points about this session. Of course, it's a big challenge. We've just heard the ambassador point out the key issues that we're going to be concerning ourselves with today, and today also as a starting point of a conversation. Now, we all know that estimating the scale of human trafficking is difficult due to the hidden nature of this crime and challenges associated with the definition. There are lots of definitions out there, and not one overruling one. But we have one understanding, that there is a business side to it all. Human trafficking is considered the second largest illegal crime operation, just after arms deals, and the ILO estimates the illicit profits by traffickers at 150 billion roundabout in industry. But you know, these are facts that are out there. They were done once. Nobody else can actually say, and this is exactly what we're talking about. Are we talking about the same data? Are we talking about the same consequences that we take from the data? So we've already heard that the NGO Committee to Stop Trafficking in Persons is the coalition of UN accredited NGOs and individuals, and they have already been on the way. They released the Bankrupting the Business of Human Trafficking report last year with a summary and recommendations. So that's the starting point. And today, and I'd love everybody to switch on their cameras who is a speaker. So today we'll hear from an orchestra of voices of organizations working on the issue, and maybe we will all gain an insight into what a reliable, consistent mechanism for measuring the efficacy of programs could look like. I mean, that would be great if that was one of the outcomes. So working on this 6th of April are Rosalee Keech. She's the president of CSTIP and the representative of ECPAT at the UN, initiating this event, and she'll be speaking last. Ruth Pojman, advisor and consultant to anti-human trafficking organizations, the institution, is joining us last minute from Vienna. Cedano will join us later. He is terribly busy right at the moment, and he heads with his company Refinitiv the data provision also for the consequences of the measurements that are taken against Russia right at the moment, that he is working on basically every minute now. Beate Andres is with us as the special representative of the ILO at the UN, Susan Snyder. Thank you very much for joining us. Apparently not from cold Washington, but from warmer fields, and she's from the US Department of State Office to Monitor and Combat Trafficking in Persons. Harry Cook is there from the IOM, International Organization for Migration, and we're going to be starting with, and now everybody else can switch off their cameras again if you like. I'm not going to subject you to my cat, so I'm going to keep my camera on. Dr. Gergana Danailova-Trainor. She is going to start our tour d'horizon. She's a subject matter expert in the area of human trafficking, has worked over the last 15 years on assessments, global and national estimates of trafficking victims and effectiveness of counter-trafficking programs and policies. Her most recent study provides a synthesis of the evidence on global and US trends in human trafficking and counter-trafficking efforts. So a lady who certainly knows a lot about data gathering and spreading. Now, you know, everybody has this thing on Twitter showing the organization and then says, views are my own. This is exactly what Gergana is just doing now. She is an economist at the US Government Accountability Office, but the views that she stands for here are her own. So please take it away.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the organizers and sponsors of this panel discussion, all of our virtual guests who've joined us from the audience, and all my fellow panelists who've gathered in this virtual space to address the challenges in measuring the effectiveness of counter-trafficking programs and policies. The focus of my introductory remarks today is on enhancing the use of data and research, or more broadly evidence, to assess the success of human trafficking policy and interventions, clearly a daunting task. From a policy perspective, we're looking at discussing a framework that is placed at the intersection of two very complex concepts, human trafficking and evidence. Let me touch upon them briefly, one at a time. We're all well aware of the multidimensional complex nature of human trafficking, internal and cross-border, physical and virtual, inflicting suffering on millions, men, women, and children of all ages in many different sectors in the economy, with different duration and across different parts of the globe, while perpetrators spanning from family members to organized transnational groups accrue estimated billions in illicit profits. Yet we've recently marked several key anniversaries, 20 years since the adoption of the UN Convention Against Transnational Organized Crime, the Palermo Protocol, and the TVPA in the United States. So it's time to take stock at what we've learned from our collective efforts, identify the main evidence gaps, and chart a path forward. Without stealing the thunder from the other participants, I'd like to acknowledge that lots of achievements have been documented in the US and around the globe. Yet there is a growing urgency to address not only the immediate challenges, such as increased vulnerabilities of at-risk populations as a result of COVID-19, or the humanitarian crisis of millions of internally displaced persons and refugees from Ukraine and other countries, but also to address the long-term root causes of both the demand and supply of this complex illicit market, including its various structures, business incentives, and costs. This requires a comprehensive policy approach informed by the evidence. This brings me to the second concept, that of evidence, which includes performance information, program evaluations, and statistical information. When we talk about evaluation of the effectiveness of counter-trafficking programs or policies, we typically look at the extent to which their objectives were achieved or are expected to be achieved. Therefore, how we define our objectives predetermines what we consider success. For example, evaluations of counter-trafficking programs have reported improved knowledge about trafficking, strengthened capacity building, and stakeholder collaboration, among others. Evaluations are typically based on qualitative rather than quantitative methodologies, often focus on outputs rather than outcomes, and assess implementation processes. In addition, few evaluations track individual victims over time, assess the financial flows related to trafficking, or examine cyber flows by showing how the internet and online platforms are used to facilitate trafficking operations, particularly sex trafficking, something very relevant in the virtual COVID environment we live in. Conversely, if we define our desired ultimate goal as the progressive eradication of human trafficking, as stated in the UN SDGs, then success can be measured as the degree to which our collective programs and policies in a particular country, region, industry, or type of exploitation reduce trafficking prevalence and illicit trafficking-related profits. Defined in this way, Assessing the degree of success, therefore, requires baseline information on trafficking prevalence and illicit financial flows associated with human trafficking. We know that collecting data on identified victims and developing estimates of total number of victims or of illicit profits is very challenging due to many reasons. Nevertheless, there are a number of ongoing efforts that have aimed to develop such estimates, and I very much look forward to hearing about them today. Ambitious goals pose challenging questions such as the following. First, how can we develop logical frameworks with individual project objectives that taken collectively can reduce trafficking prevalence and illicit financial flows associated with trafficking as an overarching goal? Such frameworks should outline the individual expected project contributions toward the overarching goal, as well as account for potential synergies among them. Second, while project-level baseline estimates often may not be feasible, how can we nevertheless use the available estimates to develop relevant programs and policies that target beneficiaries where interventions are most needed or where interventions would have the greatest impact? This would require narrowing the focus and successful stakeholder collaboration for the use of estimates in a particular territory, subject to a particular type of exploitation, or whatever the focus of the intervention is. I understand that the US Department of State, UN agencies have programs with pilot projects in this area, and I'm excited to learn about them as well. Third, what is the appropriate context for the various potential methodologies, including their assumptions and limitations and their applicability to other contexts? For example, where can we find room for causal analysis? What methodologies can be consistently applied over time? Fourth, how can these estimates be used to monitor the extent and patterns of trafficking changes in order to evaluate the effectiveness of existing policies? Next, to what extent is it possible to trace in money laundering and other illicit financial flows the specific predicate crimes, such as human trafficking, for which the proceeds are used? How can we obtain better data on these links through coordinated human trafficking and financial investigations? In addition, how do we estimate cyber flows of victims and profits from trafficking facilitated by the internet? And finally, last but not least, what can be an appropriate repository of knowledge or mechanism through which we can exchange and synthesize promising estimation methodologies and evaluation practices, as well as success stories? Thank you for your attention. I look very much forward to our discussion.
Thank you very much, Gergana, also for pointing out to the 6 questions that you mentioned towards the end. I hope that we will have time enough to discuss them later on in the panel discussion, but you certainly sort of rolled out the red carpet for all of us. Thank you. We have now on the line Harry Cook. He's a data management and research analyst with the IOM, and we know that the IOM victim of trafficking database is the largest database that is there on human trafficking worldwide. This database is actively used across all IOM regional and country missions as a standardized anti-trafficking case management tool. And Harry is in the lead of research initiatives for the IOM in different roles at the global and regional level, and he's been doing that for the last 8 years. Currently, he coordinates human trafficking and migrant vulnerability research for IOM's protection division. Quite a lot to do right at the moment, facing the war in the Ukraine and the lots of migrants that are hitting the rest of Europe right at the moment. So please, Harry, take it away.
Thank you very much, Conny. And thank you very much, distinguished representatives, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us and for all of your contributions. I would like to start by thanking the organizers, the NGO Committee to Stop Trafficking in Persons, ECPAC USA, Women Graduates USA, American Medical Women's Association, and the Sisters of Charity Federation, because we really appreciate the focus on measurement frameworks and wholeheartedly occur. As Gergana has given a really good overview, measurement in the area of trafficking persons is, of course, fiendishly difficult, though not impossible. So I wanted to just take a step back first to talk a bit about the current state of the evidence. There are actually currently no global estimates of the prevalence of trafficking. There are only estimates of the related crimes of forced labor and forced marriage, and this is the 40.3 million number. There is some overlap, of course, in people who have been trafficked and those who have been subjected to forced labor and forced marriage, but it is far from perfect. National prevalence estimates are few and far between. You can almost count the number on two hands. There are increasing numbers of estimates of trafficking in persons in particular sectors, for example, commercial sexual exploitation, manufacturing or fishing, but it's really not enough for us to monitor the situation. And of course, there are very good reasons for this. As Gergana was saying, it's really a complicated and multifaceted crime. It has a complicated definition. Victims of trafficking are a hidden population and very difficult to access. Just to give you an example of how that works, if you're very unlikely to find a victim of trafficking if you're randomly sampling households from a regular national sampling frame. Many victims are unlikely to be living in such households, let alone be able to open the door. Even where victims are present in these households and able to respond, some topics are more sensitive to address than others and may be more challenging for the context, such as trafficking for sexual exploitation, or it may be unethical to address questions to some target populations, such as children. And we know that adults underreport on the experiences of children. There are innovative methodologies to help overcome some of these issues, but this is just to give you a sense of the challenge. And to date, there has been little global guidance on these issues. Another challenge is that although heinous and widespread, trafficking is still a rare event, statistically speaking. This means that you may need to speak to thousands of people before you find, or 1,000 people before you find one victim of trafficking, if you are randomly sampling. If you then identify 6 victims after speaking to thousands of people, this may be enough to get you a prevalence estimate. However, it's not going to be enough to tell you anything really about the population of trafficked victims. So based on data from 6 victims, we can't extrapolate and say a third of all victims in the country are trafficked for exploitation in the construction sector, for example. We can't use the data to say, to get a sense of the level of profits or the fees that victims have to pay for their recruitment, for example. So prevalence does give you a sense of the scale of the problem, which of course we need to track to monitor progress towards eradication, but it doesn't provide the details needed to inform response. And this is also where the link needs to be made to measuring illicit profiteering from victims and being able to identify the sectors or industries of most concern. These data need to come from other sources. We can combine them with data that we have on prevalence estimates to get a sense of the size of illicit profiteering or the relative size of the victim population trafficked into different sectors. But where are we going to find these kinds of essential data? Well, I would argue that administrative data routinely collected by NGOs providing protection services, courts, police, ministries, or government departments and other organizations is our best and perhaps only source. These are data on identified cases of trafficking that are not in the first instance collected for research purposes, but are rather produced as part of the day-to-day operations of these kinds of organizations. And indeed, IOM's database that Conny mentioned is an example of this kind of data, now including over 70,000 cases of 70,000 victims of 155 nationalities trafficked into 185 countries registered. It's based on the victims that we provide protection and assistance to, but we also then strive to collect standardized data points that can be used to generate evidence to combat the crime. This can include, for example, recruitment fees paid by victims, how they were recruited and by whom, what sectors they were trafficked, they thought that they were going to be recruited into, and what sectors they ended up being trafficked into. These are the kind of data points that help you address questions around illicit profiteering, for example, and help you look at where in the supply chain it happens. But of course, using these type of data come with their own limitations and challenges. We don't have time to cover all of them here, but suffice to say that if you've ever tried to harmonize data from 2 different government departments, then you know what I mean. So I hope this gives you a good sense of some of the measurement challenges in the fields, particularly as they relate to estimating the total number of victims and illicit profiteering. both when it comes to collecting primary data for statistical measurement and in making better use of the administrative data that is already being collected by so many organizations. So let me conclude by taking the opportunity to just highlight two initiatives that we're working on to support these activities. We're working with ILO and UNODC to develop a global measurement framework for estimating the prevalence of trafficking for forced labor, including standardized tools, methodologies, and guidance to support member states and other stakeholders to conduct prevalence estimates with a standardized approach and hopefully to generate data that's comparable. Secondly, we're also working with UNODC to develop the first classification standard and guidance for the production and safe management and analysis of administrative data on trafficking in persons. We hope that these tools, which are due to be published later this year, will support rapid advancement in the production of standardized data to support measurement purposes. So really watch this space, because we hope to be able to contribute some great resources for stakeholders on both these different tracks that I've been describing in the coming months in the case of the administrative data, and in the next few years in the case of the statistical measurement framework. Thank you very much. Over to you, Conny.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Harry. And maybe you could share in the chat these two initiatives that you have just pointed out, the global measurement framework and the standard reaching with the UNODC for everybody to sort of remember, because we're not all writing with when one says something. Now, I don't know about you, but for us, ladies and gentlemen, who are journalists, there is sort of one Bible, and there are sort of a couple of reference points. That is, of course, the ILO number that's out there. Then there's the number of 40 billion people out there that are being trafficked. And then there is the TIP report, which is in some quarters seen as something like a Bible on human trafficking, on the state of human trafficking around the globe. Now we're going to be hearing now from Susan Snyder as the acting deputy director in the State Department's Office to Combat and Monitor Trafficking in Persons. She's been in that position for the last 2.5 years. Previously, she spent more than 30 years working on a variety of criminal justice, foreign assistance programs with the State Department. So the lady for facts and numbers. Susan, please share with us the approach on the TIP report.
Great, thank you, Connie. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for organizing this important event. It's a very timely one to have. Deciding what to measure and emphasize in any field is one of the most critical decisions any organization can take, as it can over or underemphasize one thing or another, and in some cases could even cause unintended consequences. And deciding how to measure human trafficking, as Harriet said, it's a multidisciplinary and complicated field. It's really difficult. There are many different factors to consider, and some are easier to measure than others. So today I'm going to talk about how our office uses the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and the 4 minimum standards laid out in it to assess government's efforts to combat human trafficking, and then put together our TIP report. And then I'm going to discuss some newer work our office is doing under our program to end modern slavery to measure the prevalence of human trafficking in narrower geographic regions and learn what interventions work best to reduce that prevalence. So starting with the Trafficking in Persons report, as I mentioned, our assessments are based on US law, the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and the 4 minimum standards contained in the law. These standards are available publicly on our website in the annual report, and we also share them with foreign governments. They're no surprises. I'm not going to read you the standards as we're limited on time, but please take a look if you're interested. The standards are deeply rooted in international law, namely the UN Trafficking in Persons Protocol, or the Palermo Protocol, and are consistent with international commitments governments have made under that protocol. Some of these standards are quantitative, like the number of investigations, prosecutions, convictions, and sentences given to traffickers. But others are much more qualitative, and we spend a lot of time and energy analyzing things like how government systems work, how they treat and protect victims of trafficking, whether governments are addressing the different types of trafficking that exist in the specific country, and many other factors. We analyze whether systems are comprehensive and how they've been implemented in practice. So the first three standards focus on whether the laws criminalizing traffic are adequate, both in criminalization of all forms of the crime and in prescribing strong penalties that are commensurate with other serious crimes. Those are the more quantitative standards. The fourth standards in our law requires government actions to be serious and sustained across all of the entities involved in trafficking. This standard has 12 sub-indicators and is largely meant to guide our assessment of efforts across the 3 Ps, as we like to call them: prevention, protection, and prosecution, and then help determine what types of actions qualify as serious and sustained. This standard is more qualitative in nature and is where a lot of analysis takes place. And then taken together, the cumulative analysis of the 4 standards form the basis for our tier ranking and justification in our tip report. I will add here that obviously our analysis and work is all dependent on governments providing us with the information we need to look closely at what their systems, how their systems work, and how they're doing. So in summary, on this piece, our office looks at the wide range of qualitative and quantitative indicators to assess a country's efforts against human trafficking for the annual tip report. Our office was also very lucky enough to receive significant funding from Congress to develop transformational programs that reduce the prevalence of human trafficking. And as we're all of us are asking, how do you know that you're reducing the prevalence of trafficking? And that's what I'm going to tell you about. I'll start off by saying, as Harry also said, it's not easy. The program to end modern slavery engaged the University of Georgia, or UGA as we like to call it, to develop a statistical definition of human trafficking that can be used by any researcher who wants to study the prevalence of any type of human trafficking in a very specific geographic region. This definition includes the framework that lays out what trafficking is, the indicators to use, and even sample questions to ask in surveys. The definition is now on our website and is available for all. The definition is also already being used fairly widely in ongoing trafficking research. We consider this a huge win. UGA is also leading 7 research groups from prominent universities and non-governmental organizations who are measuring the prevalence of various types of trafficking in wide-ranging, narrower geographic areas, not national studies, usually using different methodologies. All of these groups are also using one common methodology. Their outcomes will be aggregated into a meta-analysis that will show the advantages, costs, and outcomes across all of the studies. We expect that this work will pave the way for more researchers to study the prevalence of trafficking more easily, and that we'll see an increase in the use of prevalence studies. This is the first step. The second step goes to Gergana's remarks earlier, and that is understanding what interventions lower the prevalence of trafficking in certain geographic areas. We've embarked on this journey by using baseline prevalence studies, more rigorous monitoring and evaluation of our programs in regions where the prevalence studies have been conducted, and then sometimes using experimental evaluation methods, including randomized control trials, or RCTs, to understand the causal relationships of program outcomes. Using the right indicators, of course, will be key to this success. We will also do another study of prevalence at the end of the programmatic intervention to determine whether the prevalence of the type of trafficking we were working on has been affected. In other words, did the program reduce the amount of trafficking? We realize that the number of cases detected could go up because of more awareness and better identification of victims. So while prevalence is important in this program, we also rely on our outcome and other proxy indicators to actually determine our success. The hope is that we'll be able to apply what we've learned from this investment over the next 5 years or more and share it very widely with the rest of the trafficking field. We have an ethical obligation to provide trafficking victims with the most effective care and therefore need to conduct this type of research. We are very optimistic and excited about this work, but we're also sure that we will need to adapt and learn as we proceed. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Susan. And I'm looking forward to the time that we're actually going into discussion. And maybe it is quite obvious that up to now, the different organizations have different databases because they are looking at the issue from different angles. And we're now going to get to know about another angle again. We're looking at the ILO, and we're very happy to have Beate Andres on the line as the special representative to the UN and Director, International Labour Organization Office for the United Nations. Now, Beate, you've actually have a long history looking at issues of human trafficking, or better, anti-human trafficking. You've been in Geneva. You've tackled issues also like ending the worst forms of child labor. You have been instigative and initiative in the Alliance 8.7. So please share with us the thinking that is prevalent at the ILO at the moment as far as measurements and frameworks are concerned.
Well, thank you, Conny, and also want to express my great appreciation for the NGO community that brings us together. Rosalee and your colleagues, it's really great to work with you on this project and to advance the understanding of trafficking in human beings, but also help us to tackle it. So thank you very much. Now, our global estimates have already been mentioned by previous speakers, and I certainly don't want to spend too much time on definitions, but allow me just to start with a quick announcement. So on the prevalence, the number that has already been mentioned, the estimated 25 million men, women, and children in forced labor at any point in time, we are planning to provide an update of this number together with our partners, IOM and the Walk Free Foundation, in July this year. And we will see whether actually we can start measuring trends in the future based on the better data that we are now generating. On the economics of forced labor, equally important, we have also started a project on the economics of forced labor, where we look both at data to update our estimate of the illicit profits, but also to look at the costs of eradicating forced labor and human trafficking. I think it's really important to start looking at the investments that governments, but also the private sector, should make in order to eliminate trafficking forced labor. Very briefly on the definitions, because in my little intervention, I will continue using the term forced labor, because that's how our data that's the definition that we use for the surveys. But of course, as my colleague from IAM already said, it is very much related to the definition of trafficking in the Palermo Protocol. When we look at human trafficking for the purpose of forced labor, many of the manifestations that we measure actually fall under the trafficking definition. But indeed, there is an ongoing debate as to where you draw the boundaries. But the bottom line here is, and I think that is really important, that we don't split hair over definition. The bottom line is trafficking and forced labor are criminal offenses. They are severe forms of exploitation and human rights violations. And however you define and you name it, it has to be eliminated. It has no place in our century. So let me say, quickly answer this question: why is collecting data so important? Why do we spend scarce resources on implementing arguably quite expensive surveys to come to those estimates? And the answer is really that we have seen over the last decades that solid research, including the prevalence data that we have published with our partners, have played a key role in shaping international and national law and policies. It is really what we have here as a title of this event: what gets measured gets done. It puts a spotlight on the problem, but very importantly, and I think my colleague from IOM already said it, that in itself is not enough. It's not enough to know the problem is big or small, but it is more important even to understand what kind of policies are needed to eliminate, to address to address it. And that's what I'd like to discuss a little bit today. But just to say that the data we have generated has clearly helped the delegates of the ILO adopting the forced labor protocol in 2014 to better understand the problem and to understand the urgency. So I really think that this issue of data is absolutely critical. Now, what we have seen through the surveys, and here I'm talking now about national studies, household studies, quantitative household studies, but also qualitative studies. We have seen that trafficking and forced labor take place in a variety of contexts, and really no country is really immune against it. We've seen the tragedy of trafficking in conflict-ridden areas. Sadly, we see it again evolving in the conflict, in the war in Ukraine. We've seen the different manifestations of trafficking for the purpose of sexual exploitation. We've seen the different manifestation of trafficking forced labor in the private sector, of state-imposed forced labor, such as in illegal prison labor. And we have a much better understanding today of deeply entrenched practices of forced labor that have a historical legacy, such as bonded labor or vestige of slavery, as they are called. So all of this has really helped us understand that there is no one-fit-all approach in addressing trafficking, that we need tailor-made policies that really address the context that is very different in each country, but also in economic sectors. And so what we've also seen in terms of the manifestations and how we need to shape policies is that the mechanisms of recruitment, how people are actually recruited for, in particular for labor purposes within borders, but also across international borders, is absolutely critical. It really determines their vulnerability to forced labor later on. In other words, if workers are subject to very high recruitment fees, and they come from a very vulnerable, poor background and need to incur debts, that is already a stepping stone into a possible forced labor situation. It creates high risk. So in other words, the red light needs to go on here. We've also seen by looking deeper into the manifestations of forced labor and child labor, also I'm including child labor here, which is not the same obviously, but still we have learned how supply chains are structured and where there is a higher risk. And of course, not surprisingly, the highest risk is at the lower end of supply chains, where you have often informal labor arrangements, where workers are not protected by labor laws or other measures. And then finally, very interestingly also for the ILO constituents, because we also have employers in our constituencies, we've been able to show that forced labor is actually of low, it means low productivity. In other words, if you address the involuntariness in a forced labor relationship, and very often, of course, it's related to the benefits you get out of your working relationship, in other words, wages, you can actually increase productivity. And I want to give a concrete example here of a country that should be really commended for its bold action to address a legacy of forced labor, and that's Uzbekistan. It has had a legacy of Soviet-style forced labor and child labor in agriculture, and has taken a very important political decision in 2016 to eliminate those forms. And working with the government and with other partners like the World Bank, we've been able to show that actually those who pick cotton against their will, they are not productive. And by a certain increase in wages, a bigger part of the problem was already solvable. We've also been able to show that by putting in place more regulated mechanisms of recruitment, the problem can be solved. And indeed, what we see today is that forced labor and child labor has been eliminated from the agricultural sector. And that has also translated into, of course, positive benefits for the country in terms of access to trade and to private markets. So you really see the benefits for countries to address the issue, not to turn a blind eye on it, but actually to take bold political action. And then the other point I'd like to quickly raise is in response to, again, to my colleague from IIM on the standardization, and we also heard this from the US government representative. It is indeed really critical to translate legal definitions into statistical definitions, because that will make the difference and will help us standardizing and comparing data. The ILO has a mechanism for doing so, and that's the International Conference of Labor Statisticians, a mechanism that has met since the 1920s, so 100 years, it was set up 100 years ago, and ever since standardizes definitions to measure any form of any issue that's related to the world of work, including in 2018 adopted a standard on forced labor. And as we heard already from IIM, we are now partnering with IIM and UNODC to develop a similar standard on trafficking. That will take, of course, time. It will not come overnight because it needs that common understanding and discussion also with governments, because those definitions are government owned. They will be implemented by national offices of statistics. That makes the big difference here. And that also creates that national ownership that you need to address trafficking and forced labor. So to conclude, and as you can see in all my examples, we really believe that partnerships are absolutely critical. As I said, we all faced with the problem of scarce resources, so we need to join forces, we need to work together. It is important to work with governments, but also, as we think in the ILO, very important to also work with workers and employers organizations, because that can help in particular address forced labor, trafficking and forced labor in the private sector. And looking forward, there is, I think, a lot we can learn also from other partners in terms of developing new tools to measure, digital tools to measure trafficking and forced labor. So again, thank you very much for bringing us together, and over to you, Conny.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Beate. Don't run away, because we really want to discuss in a moment. And let me just pick up your example of Uzbekistan and the collaborative aspect of that, because I've come across this example in many other conferences, be it for the World Bank, be it on the greening of the economy, be it in agriculture. It's this beautiful example of working together, a committed government, but then you also need partnerships with ILO, FAO, World Bank, etc. And I think that is something that is a pattern that can be repeated in many, many other areas. But I'm sort of, outing myself as somebody who's been dealing with the issues for a number of years, so that I pretend as a moderator to also have a view on it. So we talk later. For now, I would like to invite our first discussant, a lady who is very brave, because I only phoned her yesterday, but we unfortunately have a dropout. The lady from the UNODC could not be with us today, regretfully, and she sends her regards to everybody. So Ruth Pojman, who has also been in the area of anti-human trafficking for many, many years. She was for a decade deputy coordinator and senior advisor at the OSCE office of the special representative and coordinator for combating trafficking in human beings. That's quite a mouthful, but she's been, let's say, a freelance advisor, somebody who is working with almost every organization that we've seen and heard from this afternoon or this morning in the US. So when you hear this, Ruth, when you hear this concern about data, the fact that we need data that talks to everybody and not just to the one organization that raises it, what does that elucidate in you? What is your reaction?
Well, I said to you this morning, and I'll repeat it since you liked it, Connie, you can't always compare the data and figures and the measurement systems that are out there right now. It's like dealing with apples and oranges. So I'm really, really pleased to and honored to join you and to get these updates from all the wonderful work that the U.S. government, IOM, and ILO in particular are doing. This is really, really heartening because it's, as Harry said, you know, there's so many tools out there, and I just had found today actually this publication. I don't know if you can see, but it's from the JTIP and GAO organized a meeting in 2004 on data. Data collection and research on trafficking, and I know Amy O'Neill Richard, who's here, was there as well, and I think Beate was there, and UNODC, and we've come a long way, baby, as they say. So I think, yeah, I think so much has been done, and as Harry said, we don't need to reinvent the wheel at this time. But on the other hand, you know, everyone has emphasized that each country is using different data, and even across ministries, as Harry mentioned, there are different data sets that are being used. So it is really, really important. And as an independent researcher now, working with some, you know, for both U.S. government projects and, you know, for the ILO, for example, last year I did a self-assessment with the ILO of the government of Uzbekistan. And yeah, so I think it's so important to, you know, develop these tools and that they should be standardized. And I really, I'm really, really pleased to hear about these efforts. And I know also in terms of knowledge transfer, you know, the ILO has led with the Alliance 8.7 and the, yeah, all the different projects that have been developed under that, including with the UN in New York. And the UN University to really, you know, develop a knowledge hub and knowledge transfers so that we're building on what we already know. And yeah, I think that's really interesting about what Beate just mentioned about the statistical definitions of legal definitions, which also JTIP mentioned. And, you know, there's also been developed, I think, first by UNODC, also model laws, and what Beate mentioned, though, about tailoring all these different tools. So it's really great to have tools that are harmonized and standardized, and so that you can compare data across the globe. At the same time, one size doesn't fit all. So it's really important also to have guidance and not to forget that when you're developing, say, a national referral mechanism, and that's also, you know, collecting data, that also this is, you know, a system that is tailored to a country and not just taken off a mold and stamped into a country. And then last but not least, you know, collaboration has been mentioned several times, and I have worked both, you know, as an employee of, say, IOM, and in the US government as a donor, and at the OSCE, for example, as you mentioned, and now as a consultant to some of the same organizations. And I just think it's, you know, it's really wonderful to see an event like this and all the collaborations that have grown with the global estimates, and you know, in also all the work that JTIP does in the annual trafficking report, which is based on contributions not only from governments but from NGOs and you know, through yeah, calls for information around the world. So it's we are getting there, and I look forward to seeing the tools. And yeah, it's very hopeful at this trying time in the world.
Great. Maybe as one question to be answered later, what would help your work in working with all these organizations? What would you need, and what would you wish that the UN had sort of at least internally as a system? But that's a question for later. Harry, we had decided that we were going to have a very quick look at the very probable rising of numbers of trafficked people, especially women, due to the fact that so many millions are leaving the Ukraine right at the moment. And whilst they're sort of, official greeting points, for example, last week when I was in Berlin, I saw people arriving with the train, but they didn't know into whose arms they fell in the true sense of the word. So let's look for just one moment at Europe. We haven't quite overcome the waves that hit us after 2015 with the migration wave. Now we have the next migration wave. So how can we come to grips with that and with the wish to actually eradicate human trafficking?
Yes, thank you, Connie. Well, it's a huge topic that we could spend we could have several sessions just on this, of course. But let me start by saying that there is very broad consensus that humanitarian crisis can exacerbate the risk of human trafficking, of course, and also give rise to new trends in trafficking as opportunists seek to exploit the vulnerabilities of people who are incapacitated by instability and development. And displacement, sorry. We think about it as a risk multiplier. So people already may have existing vulnerabilities, risk factors may already be prevalent, and then something like this happens on a sort of unimaginable scale, that you have this enormous risk multiplier. At the same time, reduced capacity of duty bearers to respond and to protect people. And all of this obviously is really just a cocktail for unfortunately increasing these kinds of forms of exploitation. And we really have the full spectrum of human suffering on display, of course, in the crisis in Ukraine. So trafficking, it was already a phenomenon in Ukraine and the surrounding countries, and it was already known to be, it's one of our largest programs actually on victim assistance before the crisis. Known to proliferate through highly adaptable strategies, trafficking from Ukraine. And we also know that there's a very high proportion of female-headed households with caregiver responsibilities and vulnerable people attempting to leave the country, of course, and flee to safety. So it's obvious that the risk of trafficking is extremely high. At the same time, the conflict is characterized by a large presence of armed actors, hugely constrained mobility, so people have to actually often put themselves into situations of extreme vulnerability in order to be able to migrate and to flee the situation, and major displacement of civilian populations, especially women and children. So we can also, I think, expect that sexual violence is happening as well, and probably also with impunity and little options for reporting. The situation is a bit different, I think, to the migration that happened sort of as a result of the crisis in the Levant. At least, in this circumstance, we do have freedom of movement to a large extent into neighboring countries in Europe. We have already, have had movement regularized, for example, across Europe, and this already massively supports, I think, the sort of safe movement of people. Just briefly to mention also to pick up on the topics you mentioned, whose arms are these people arriving into? We've had an enormous groundswell of support to help receive Ukrainians, across the neighboring countries, and there are a lot of great volunteer networks, but we also need to be monitoring this situation and these networks, and we do need to keep track of, who's actually offering accommodation, who's providing transport. We do need to provide some oversight here, because this is also an entry point for people to actually be taken into situations where they can be exploited. Also, just while I'm on the topic, we could go on for a long time on the different kinds of response, but I think it's really important that we continue to receive arrivals in a non-discriminatory, gender-sensitive and culturally sensitive manner, with no bias or differing approaches depending on a person's nationality, ethnicity, or status of documentation. So that's also incredibly important, as we also are seeing a large amount of third country nationals who are also leaving Ukraine at this point in time as well. So I'll stop there because we could go on forever, but thank you.
Yeah, we have half an hour left, and we have she who's going to join us briefly. Could please everybody who is a speaker put on their screens again, put on their cameras again, so I might actually sort of get your response, because I know that there was another person who wanted to quickly touch upon the present crisis situation that we do have in the Ukraine, and I think Beate said this one sentence: "It has no place in our century." War certainly of that scale certainly doesn't have place in our century, but it's happening. And whilst we're looking at the spotlight, Ukraine, we mustn't forget that, of course, there are long-standing areas where there are vulnerable people. So anybody who wants to quickly remark anything, Rosalee is going to be there at the moment. Susan, Beate, Gergana? No. Okay, in this case, I'd like to invite Rosalee to stage, because of course, not only did she put together with her team this program, but she is the president of CSTIP, she's a campaigner, she's a representative of ECPAT at the UN, and as the former businesswoman that she was, she brings that approach also to her NGO work, and she believes that the United Nations community can expand its policies and procedures to bankrupt the business of human trafficking. So Rosalee, I think I've rolled out the red carpet. Please walk on it.
Thank you. My remarks today have been altered to include a very personal message as a result of the video shown of Ukraine communities yesterday in the Security Council. My work in anti-slavery is a tribute to my father and the millions that didn't survive, including my aunt and grandfather in the Holocaust of World War II. My father was 17 years old when he became a slave to the Nazi regime in the Ukraine. I never thought that the images of burned bodies and mass graves would again be possible only 77 years after the end of the war. The lessons of the Holocaust have taught me that it doesn't start with mass graves. It starts with hate speech that is allowed to fester and grow into harassment, threats, and violence. It gets worse when state actors are allowed to create violence in the street and then blame it on others. It becomes horrific when the power of government is used to grow into war machines. And it doesn't stop with mass graves. It grows further into concentration camps and slavery until it encircles the world. I, for one, cannot remain silent while children, women, and men are enslaved. I cannot remain inactive when atrocities are committed on Ukrainians and other communities in the world. We know the tools to stop human trafficking and the suffering it causes. We know that measure and display of credible data will do more to stop the purchasing and investing from companies that utilize slave labor in their manufacturing or supply chain. We know that 70% of buyers of sex trafficking victims will not engage if their families, co-workers, and friends found out. We know that if the risk was too great and that the traffickers and their enablers were stopped of using their ill-gotten gains to have 459-foot yachts with gold-lined bathroom fixtures, they may think twice. The time to act is now. We call on the United Nations community and its member states to establish global measurement standards, including for illicit profiteering and numbers of trafficking victims. 2, to incorporate such estimates into a results framework for human trafficking programs and projects. And 3, to facilitate collaboration amongst multi-sectors engaged in policymaking, implementation, monitoring, and display of results. Slavery has been with us for millenniums. If we are serious about ending human trafficking, we need to quickly pivot and understand what is working and what isn't working to eradicate human trafficking. The world agrees that victimization is an issue. Today's policies and programs rely on potential victims, also known as at-risk populations, preventing the victimization from happening. Yet, if the perpetrators and their enablers are making billions in illicit profits, what is their incentive to stop? Simple economics: if there is no demand, there is no supply. By stopping the illicit profiteering through policies and programs that bankrupt the business of human trafficking and reduce demand for slavery, we propose that we can get closer to reaching the goal of eradicating human trafficking. But we are never going to know how close we are coming to eradicating human trafficking until we all start measuring and displaying results by a universal definition of success. Our definition: victimization, prevalence, and profiteering. Is that eliminating that is the definition of success. In 2021, the CSTIP published Bankrupting the Business of Human Trafficking, summary and recommendations compiled from a discussion with 24 international experts. The pragmatic recommendations are action items that governments, including the United Nations, law enforcement, businesses, or NGOs can do to help end the demand and illicit profiteering that goes on. We hope you find it useful in your anti-slavery actions, and we thank you all for participating in this program. And we will be developing an outcome summary and sharing the recording after the event. Thank you.
As a moderator, I normally do not stop myself from speaking, but I did this time. So thank you very much, Rosalee, and also for your heartfelt remarks right at the beginning. I saw that Ruth was actually raising her hand. So please,
Yes.
The floor is yours.
Yeah, as someone actually, as a couple of you know, who has spent my whole life actually working in, starting off in conflict resolution between the United States and the USSR, and spent basically my whole adult life in the former Soviet Union or working with that region. Yeah, this is just beyond heartbreaking, and it's devastating. And Rosalee, thank you so much for sharing this testimony about your family, and to you for all you do. Harry already just laid the groundwork for trafficking in conflict situations, so I'm not going to say anything more about that. I believe also that tomorrow there's a hearing at the US Congress, including Carrie Johnstone from JTIP on this exact issue. But I just wanted to share a few observations I have as well, because I've been, I can't help but be engaged. And actually, I just got a call at the beginning of this meeting from a professor here who's going to hire a refugee at the law school here. So I'm so excited, to help one refugee get a job. But yeah, there's so much that needs to be done to prevent trafficking and respond to trafficking in such horrible crises. And at the beginning of the war, there was a lot of, some friends of mine and refugees I talked to reported, kind of migrant smugglers, traffickers, bandits, mercenaries, and then I've heard a lot worse things, which not talking about, but it reminded me also of going back to Kosovo, and how also, I've worked in international organizations where trafficking in persons is also politicized, and it's used, there are accusations that are thrown at other countries about trafficking in persons. In that case, it was a case of trafficking for organ removal, but then it becomes politicized. And the same thing happened in Donbass, Ukraine in 2014. And now there's talk of trafficking of conscripts, of selling of babies, of sex trafficking, of all sorts of horrible things happening. And today I heard a talk by UNHCR at the OSCE conference that's going on right now. And one of the issues that was raised in this regard also is the amount of, on one level, it's sort of like the road to hell is paved with good intentions. There's an outpouring like never before of good-hearted people who want to help. And so there are a lot of refugees who get registered at a border, but then they disappear. And a lot of them are not going to, are not going through any systems that are being organized by IOM and UNHCR and other NGOs. And there's so many NGOs and private citizens now trying to do their part that most people, the vast majority of people will all be helped, like this professor today who called me. But on the other hand, there are others who will be deceived and who will be exploited. So this is a whole new huge challenge right now. So thanks to all of you, especially in this case, IOM here, for all that you're doing to try and to make sure that this is not dangerous, considering this unprecedented, devastating war and refugee flow.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I'd like to invite Beate to share her observations and her thoughts. And after that, I'd actually like to come back from the present focus on, and very important focus on, Ukraine and the refugees from the Ukraine, and get back to the measurement and why we need it, and why we need a framework. But please, Beate first.
Thank you, Conny. And I, of course, also want to thank Rosalee for sharing her personal story, but also for just making us, again, think about the war we see today. I think what is really critical here, and there is a link also to the data. We tend to focus data collection, or our whole sort of, focus is indeed on the victims. But we also have to understand who is the abuser of power. And there, I think ILO forced labor conventions, they actually historically were adopted to limit the abuse of power of governments. That was the initial intention. It was not the same context in which the trafficking protocol developed. So the Convention 105 on forced labor, for instance, was adopted specifically to prevent the use of forced labor for economic purposes. It was informed by the horror that Rosalee mentioned, the Nazi concentration camps and the forced labor used in prison labor camps. But you also have the military as a possible source of abuse of power. So how you contain the government institutions that can abuse power and exert forced labor, that is one problem. And the other is the private sector. And there are really differences there in terms of how to address the issue. The private sector also, there you have to look whether you're talking about a big multinational company or whether you're looking at an informal small-scale family enterprise in a developing country. There are big differences here, how you address the issue and what you expect, what kind of institutional arrangements you need to have to rein in power and to prevent that abuse of power.
On that issue, I think there's a big movement going on to not just have corporate social responsibility, but to have supply chain responsibility, and that hopefully, if and when carried through properly in the right sense, also including small and medium-sized companies, that way could be a pathway also to help eradicate forced labor. But it has the potential to. So, but Rosalee is definitely looking for an answer. And so maybe I just go back to Gergana. Gergana, you said there were a couple of questions that need to be tackled. So could you just share with us how important would it be to have what Harry pointed out, this global measurement system? How important would it be that you all talk in the same kind of data frame for maybe also to understand each other better, and then also to communicate that to the outer world?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to just thank Ruth first about the fact that she brought up and used our report, the GAO report from 15 years ago, as a baseline of the need to work on better data and measurement to address monitoring and evaluation in human trafficking. I'm very, very encouraged by the fact that we're discussing standardization of data, operational definitions. We're talking about use of prevalence studies as baselines, and we're talking about, as Susan mentioned, about meta-analysis of what we learn based on all of our evidence. I think that is very, very encouraging, because these are kind of the logical steps of moving us in the right direction, going from individual projects and individual victim assistance from different types of data, whether they're administrative data, as Harry mentioned, or then broader estimates that use various methodologies to get to total number of victims. So I think that these are all steps in the right direction. And I know that we were also expecting to have a participant who would mention the financial side and the financial flows. So I'd like to maybe just touch upon this as well, because we might be running out of time, and I don't know when he might be able to join us. So I just wanted to mention a few things about that. So and also as we've been talking about both the demand and supply side of trafficking, so both of these aspects of the market. So as we know, human trafficking intersects with other criminal activities, such as money laundering, illicit finance, identity theft, transnational organized crime, including cybercrime. So risks to the financial systems are linked to risks fueling human trafficking crimes. Human trafficking fuels corruption, and illicit profiteering and financial flows by weakening governance and institutions. At the same time, if not sanctioned and prevented from entering the US financial system, illicit flows can further fuel human trafficking. So in going back to our definition of success that Rosalee mentioned and other panelists mentioned, as it is dependent on stated objectives, if the policy goal is to disrupt and dismantle illicit financial and human trafficking networks, then in addition to reducing the prevalence of trafficking, we also need to be looking at careful mapping and estimation of internal and cross-border flows of victims of trafficking, cyber flows, especially for sex trafficking victims, and financial flows. So again, there's never going to be an exhaustive list, but I just would like to mention that when we are discussing this ultimate goal of eradication of human trafficking, we should look at baselines and estimates of all these different flows and the links among them. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'd love to give the floor to Susan.
Sure, thank you. And thanks, Gergana, for mentioning these new and innovative things that we're trying. I will say, just as a contrast to the global and even national kind of prevalence studies, we are narrowing them down to look at different types of trafficking in narrower geographic regions, for example, in certain states or provinces of countries, because it is easier and cheaper. But we are heartened and hope, I mean, it's always, this is difficult, but we hope that the results of this will enable us to know a little bit more about the prevalence of trafficking on it's less than a global scale, but geographic scale, as more and more of these are done, and we make it easier to do them by setting up these statistical definitions and giving folks kind of a roadmap to do them. We hope that it will pay dividends. And I will say that we are also collaborating with IOM and ILO and UNODC on both of the projects that Harry mentioned at the very beginning. And we're hopeful that we will get some kind of understanding that when you do these measurements, that when you do it this way, you count these certain folks, and when you do it another way, you count the tip definition. So trying to just lay out kind of what you actually are measuring so that it's clearer to everybody who's doing the research. we'll see if that works or not. But that is the hope. Thank you.
Yeah, this is sort of 10 minutes left for the program. I don't have much hope that Cedano will be able to join us. He is actually right at the moment involved in sort of sorting out, getting the right data together and see what the sanctions, what kind of effect they will have. So not astonishing that he cannot keep his commitment, which he would have liked. And of course, we would have liked to have heard from him how to follow the track of the money in order to then also come to grips and eradicate human trafficking. Now, Harry, I'm quite sure that having mentioned the two aspects where you're collaborating with ILO and UNODC on one and with UNODC on the other, and also with the Department of State, are there to make talking amongst the agencies easier. When they're out there, what do you expect will happen?
Well, that's a very good question. I think we really need to take the time to socialize the approaches with member states in particular, given our role, obviously, within the UN system, but certainly with other stakeholders as well. But really important, I think, and this is something that Beate mentioned earlier, is that these tools and approaches are really developed in a sort of a bottom-up process, a multilateral process, really taking inputs and different regional, local contexts into account, a range of different views from a variety of stakeholders addressing the problem from different angles. So, you know, not only national statistical offices, but of course, those who are involved in responding to trafficking, but also survivors as well, and groups that are really supporting survivors and who are delivering protection services. In addition, of course, to the lawyers to make sure that the legal definitions are being treated properly. But I mean, our hope is really that the process for getting there is helping to foster the uptake of the standards as they come out as well. So there's really a sense of sort of ownership as they come out. But of course, we can't just release them and stop there. We will be also developing a program of support to help specific stakeholders, member states in particular, of course, take them forward and pilot them. And we really hope to build a community of practice around these methods and methodologies as well, and try to foster that and keep it going, so that there is a group of experts that can be called upon to support in various different contexts as well. So those are my initial thoughts on how to take the measurement forward itself. I think also another point that we really need to start working to address is not just the way that we develop the statistics themselves, but how we're actually going to use it to measure efficacy and impact of programming. And in a sense, that is, you know, that's a related process, but it is also a bit different. And I think this field is also further behind than other fields on that, again, for good reasons and because of the measurement challenges we've discussed. But you know, these are also specific methodologies in themselves. If we're applying you know, lessons learned and best practice, for example, from the medical field and looking at randomized controlled trials. And I must say that the US Department of State has been very prescient on this, and has been one of the organizations that has actually given space for being able to implement these sorts of methodologies within grant making, because there are really a lot of different challenges here. If you want to be able to measure an effect, you need to take a baseline. You need to have a significant intervention that will, you know, have a big enough impact to then measure. And then you need to also then be able to take at least an end line. You know, this could take potentially 5 years, and a lot of counter-trafficking projects are unfortunately just not that long and are not big enough to incorporate, and particularly also not big enough to incorporate the community level and the structural level interventions that will also make the most difference in the long run as well. So that's also something that we need to also start to address in a more sort of standardized manner, but also then to socialize the approaches across the board with the counter-trafficking community.
May I throw the ball into Beate's court for a moment? Beate, on a national level, most countries have this sort of criminal statistics like, you know, theft has increased or decreased, the use of drugs has increased or decreased, and it gives a sense of reliability. When do you think are we going to have the same kind of sense of reliability, and therefore also, as Harry just said, you know, how can we then increase the efficacy of programs in the field and in the data of human trafficking?
Well, Conny, I wish I had this magic ball and I could say, it's either the
you know, I always ask these stupid questions. Yeah.
No, it's a very good question, Conny, and a very fair question, and actually something we've been really hoping to achieve sooner rather than later: the ability to measure trends. Now, I think we have to make a distinction here between measuring trends in terms of case law, so the number of cases identified. I think here in countries that have a strong and robust institutional response, law enforcement response, you can already make those conclusions, not to the same extent as you have with other crimes, because the underreporting of the trafficking crime, we believe, is still very significant, very, very significant, but it's going in the right direction, I would say. In terms of prevalence data, in other words, prevalence data actually gives you an idea of the dark number, like the unreported, the unrecognized number of cases, because it's a different methodology. You actually see, first of all, what still needs to be done in terms of the institutional response. But hopefully with the standardization of methodologies that we've all been talking about and definitions, in the future, we will also be able to show trends on the basis of prevalence data. So I would say we are close. We've come a long way over the last 20 years. And all the projects that we've heard today, they're all going in the right direction.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And if you're wondering why I was just for once not completely focused on you, but I heard you, it's because I'm still trying to get you in. It seems to be difficult. So I think we're not going to make it, but it's just thoughts are with us. And Rosalee has already said that we are going to share the contribution that Refinitiv has as far as data provision is concerned. Following the money in human trafficking is an important aspect also to come to grips with the crime, and therefore maybe give us the feeling, you know, at least a couple of things are A, being observed, and B, then counteracted. As we're drawing to an end, I would like to say A, thank you to everybody. We know it's the beginning of a conversation, but I just see the first question from Jacqueline Shapiro, and I'll share it with you. One aspect of data collection is not that we haven't touched upon is trafficking is an illicit and profitable business that its perpetrators don't want you to get the answers. How must that be addressed? Again, I would refer to the panelist we haven't had because he can get it out into the open, and we've had Cedano talking about Refinitiv's methods of following the money flows, and therefore giving a chance to people. But Rosalee, the promise is out. You're going to share what they do and how they do it, so that question is going to be answered. It's quite amazing how quickly 90 minutes go. Rosalee with the last words.
Okay, and a little bit to address Jackie's question. It's our belief that if people would get the data in their hands, i.e. if they would know what industries, what products are tainted with slave labor, they wouldn't purchase it. The same thing is true of investments. Good people would not invest in companies that do that. So we're looking forward to the day when we can say, A, there's an app for that by barcodes, we can figure out what is the status of companies' human trafficking experience. And then two, the measurements that go along with it, even from a universal perspective, the trends in diminishing human trafficking once we put into place additional programs that not only help the vulnerable from becoming vulnerable, but also from the stand of bankrupting the business of human trafficking. Thank you all to everyone for your remarks and your contributions to making this a success.
And with those words, I can only say thank you to everybody who's been both on the Zoom and has seen the UN TV session. Spread the good word, share it with your friends and maybe also with your family, but certainly with the friends and follow us so that a couple more people can get the insight that we try to put together in this program. Thank you very much for everybody who's actually taking the time to do a lot of preparation and a last minute jump in from Vienna. So thank you, Ruth, as well. That's it. This part of the conversation, but we will have a next one soonish. So watch this space. Till then, bye.